Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics either in business or in life and simplify them. And today's special guest, I'm so excited for you guys to hear the wisdom from her. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Dana Marrocco, PhD. She's the author of The Top 10 Lies We Tell Ourselves and How to Stop Believing Them. This is slated to release in August of 2018. Now, the teachings in this book draw from her professional background in educational psychology and A Course in Miracles. It's a lighthearted but really profound discussion into some of the most common self-deceptions that keep people from living happy and creative lives. She lives with her family in New Jersey. Dr. Dana, she speaks, she sings, and she performs self-help stand-up at local spiritual centers and retreats. Experience Dr. Dana's style on ACIM Gather, which is on course with Dr. Dana every Wednesday from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or on her YouTube video series entitled, Did You Forget to Laugh? I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Dr. Dana. Hello.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, Dr. Dana, we desperately need to chat. I have so many questions to ask you. Now, I find as I go through and interview amazingly smart women and men like yourself on the podcast, what I keep coming back to over and over and over again is how gosh darn important this brain is in everything in our life. So tell me, you've written this book about the top 10 lies. What led you there? How did this book come from, and where did it come from in your life?
Right. Wow. Great question. Well, really, the book is all about what I discovered through both my spiritual path and my study of psychology is that there's this thing that I label in the book self-deception, and it really can be attributed to anytime we experience a loss of peace, big or small. And what I found out about this self-deception is that it's something that we share, and I refer to it as the ego, the fear-soaked part of the mind. And we share it in such a specific way. It operates in such a similar way in all of us that I really found it to be surprisingly simple. If you want to, I know you like to simplify things.
Yes.
Surprisingly simple to really get to the source of it and make some significant shifts.
So wait, self-deception, let's define that really first. What does that mean to you?
I'm talking about the level of our thought system. And really, self-deception comes in when we choose to believe our fear-driven thoughts that come from the ego, this idea that it's possible to be separate from each other and separate from our source. And that, as you can imagine, would automatically be a fear-inducing experience. We kind of bury that underground unconsciously, but that fear just permeates everything if we choose to believe that's how things are operating.
And what stops people from making progress or making a change in their life, personally or professionally, really all keeps boiling back down to fear, right? It's that wanting to play small just because that feels safe and what have you, right? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, well, it's sort of like the fear way of operating is just kind of our default setting, and we don't realize that we made that choice because we also bury the fact that we made that choice. We don't think to myself, oh, I really shouldn't have chosen fear over love, and I shouldn't be choosing fear over love again and again. But that is, in effect, what we have done.
Yeah.
And so it's really a matter of unlearning that habit that doesn't suit us, that isn't real, if you want to think about it in terms of a metaphysical way, this whole idea that it's possible to be separate from each other and from our source. It's just kind of this false reality, this false self-concept that we make for ourselves and others.
So let's back up a little. Tell us a bit about your journey to writing this book, and how did you get to this point of wisdom? You mentioned that you had studied A Course in Miracles, but take us before that. Tell us a little bit about you.
I think what's really behind it is my lifelong struggle with depression. I was just, from my earliest memories, a very depressed child. And I don't really have anything external as far as experiences that would have warranted that. It was just a deep-seated feeling that I was dead inside. That's the best way I can articulate it now. I wouldn't have been able to say that as a child, but now looking back, I can see that that's what I was, in fact, feeling. And so I just wanted to find a way to overcome that in myself. I was raised Catholic and I wasn't really finding that comfort level in my religion. And so that's why I majored in psychology and went all the way through to the PhD to the expert level. I'm like, I got to figure this out. I have to change this in myself. And I wanted to help others too along the path. But I wasn't finding the answers that were truly helping me. In fact, my depression even continued through graduate school and beyond, and kind of came to a peak when I had children. I suffered from postpartum depression as well. And that's when I really reached this point of surrender and just kind of called out for help. Like, there has to be another way to live and to be. I just can't do this anymore. And so that was kind of my point of surrender, my low point. And then I really focused to the more spiritual side of, kind of remembering my connection to everything, which we can't ever really lose. And that is the good news in all of this. But I did feel like I had lost it. And Course in Miracles was a big part in, reinstating that for me and for others as well.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, because I think there's quite a few people that are listening right here thinking, that kind of sounds like my story. And just to dive into a little bit of that, were you an introvert or an extrovert as a child? Were you a middle child? Or were you an only child? Like, can you tell us a little bit more details of what it looked like when you were as a kid?
Sure. I was an only child until I was 9 years old, and I was raised in rural Minnesota, and I was very isolated physically, if you think of my environment.
Sure.
I just kind of remember just spending a lot of time outside with animals and kind of having this whole like make-believe life. And I was an introvert, although I could play the part of being social when I wanted to, but it did kind of drain me. But I was always an observer. I always just liked to watch people, even from my early memories. And I was always wondering, why do people do the things they do? I was also fascinated with dreams, and I started reading Freud like in middle school, and that's kind of the kid I was.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating stuff. And so do you have like your earliest memory of where you just, you said feeling dead inside, like were you 5, were you 10, were you 15? What was your earliest memory of that? Because that breaks my heart when you say that, right?
I know. And it breaks my family's heart to hear it. And so it's kind of hard to think of sharing it, especially in a public way like a book. But I do it because I joke now that it was a gift of feeling dead inside. I used to think of it as a curse because I believed that it was possible.
Yeah.
But now I look at it as kind of that tipping point. When you get to that point of the way I'm viewing the world isn't working, then you can really open up to, complete shift. Because I was willing to give up everything about what I thought, who I was and what this was all for. I was willing to surrender all of that for a new interpretation. And not that level of surrender is necessary for a shift, but for me, that was the form it took.
Yeah. Well, I think there always is a tipping point at some point. You call it a tipping point, a breaking point, wherever, where you just like go, enough. Like, this is no longer working, and it's not my best life. On a certain level, I remember a very distinct breaking point in my own childhood. I was right around 12 years old or so, and I grew up incredibly shy, like so shy, wouldn't talk to anybody, much less, a tree. If it looked at me funny, I would just be like, I'd shudder a bit. And I remember at 12 going, Mary, okay, that could be the life story that you carry on for the rest of your life, and it will be a sad and isolated and not very fun life, or you could try something different and call that a divine nudge or whatever you might want to be. But I distinctly remember in that moment going, yeah, this isn't the best life I could have. And I am a bit sad that I don't have any friends, and I'm so paralyzed by fear to even reach out and talk to people. And that at 12, I went, okay, right. Well, what does this look like? Different, And all it takes is one friend, right? Just get one friend that loops you in, and then you start to blossom into somebody different. Did you have a kind of a moment like that in your childhood, or did it come later down the line?
Well, I'm definitely relating to what you said about the shyness and quietness. And for me, I just felt like all my relationships were so fragile, like China, really. I just felt like if I say one wrong thing to this person, they'll hate me forever. Like, I really felt like, and that's just, that's terrifying. And so I felt like, well, maybe it's better not to say anything. And I just kind of again, played that observer role. And it's
Yeah.
very isolating. And that is really the goal the ego has for all of us. We think of the ego as our friend or that we need it to protect us. But really what it's trying to do is isolate us, to make us feel completely alone and desperate with no way out. It's just such a dead end.
Yeah.
But right on the other side of it is like unstoppable peace. Like it's just like right there because you almost do have to see the ego for what it is to really be able to come to the firm decision to be done with it.
So what do you think then, out of all the top 10 lies in your book, what's the number one lie that we tell ourselves that holds us back?
Right. Well, I'll share a couple of things. First, in the introduction, I give the spoiler alert that all the top 10 lies, and really, of course, there could have been more than 10, but they're all related to one faulty thought which I just mentioned, that it's possible to be separate from each other and separate from our source. That's the one thought and the only thought that we need to correct. Because if we do correct that and we reject that that's possible, that brings about the complete and total shift, because the ego is based on this idea of separation. So to skip down to number one, because I know you like to simplify things on your podcast, which I think is brilliant, because the ego likes to complicate. So you're already setting a goal for yourself and your viewers to be egoless. So I applaud you for that. But the number one is you can't count on anyone but yourself. And by the way, you're a huge disappointment. Which
I mean,
I'm glad you laughed, because I do mean for these to be funny, because we can kind of laugh about it, that we would actually believe it. But this is what we were just talking about.
Right. And, I'm laughing because I resonate with it, because sometimes I've said that to myself, like, you can't trust anybody else. Like you're the only one that can do this one thing. And by the way, you suck.
Yes, I know. So what's the way out of that? I mean, you just got to laugh at it.
Right. Why do we say that to ourselves?
I know. It's just this unconscious, you know what it is? I kind of think of it now as, we have these affirmations. And I think for most people they are, I want to be a more loving person. I want to be a better person. But then we also have these hidden affirmations that are completely run by the ego. And that has a totally different agenda. And the hidden affirmations are what really run the show. And we know that our thoughts create our reality, but it's not really our conscious thoughts. It's our unconscious thoughts that are creating the reality. So to look at what's underneath the surface, what are my hidden beliefs that are really keeping me from being happy? And really at the core that goes along with that lie that I just shared is that here's how the ego operates. And the ego's insane, but the ego operates thinking, if I can convince myself, I'd prefer that you be unworthy. If I can convince myself that you're unworthy, then I won't ever have to look at the fact that I'm unworthy. So some people, you can probably observe the world and know that some people point the finger, always pointing out the inadequacies in others. Some people just naturally point it at themselves. That's how I was. I don't ever remember blaming anyone for anything. I always thought everything was my fault.
Yeah.
But either way, we're keeping that blame and judgment alive, and that's what keeps the ego going. It's just a vicious cycle. It's a loop that from within that you can't get out. You just have to give up the whole thing, basically.
So besides my marriage, but also my relationship with my children, both those relationships are so hard sometimes. And they're so, but they're also so rewarding, but they are so hard, right? And I think sometimes the hardest part about it is you have this other person with all of their emotions. Let's just take relationships, husband and wife, or partnerships that way, rather than children, because children are their own little ball of wax, right? But when you're relating with your partner, it's sometimes I fall into the trap of like, well, it's obviously all the things you're doing wrong that is making all of this not right, and there is a level of taking ownership of your own ish, right, as well, right? And that I think what's tricky and frustrating in that is, if I've learned one thing over the last 40 years of living, is that you can't change somebody else, right? As much as you want to, you can't really change somebody else. So then they're left to be responsible for their own stuff, right? You're responsible for your stuff. Where's the balance here? Like, what part do we own in relationships, do you think?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I relate to everything you said about it being just somehow, brilliant and rewarding and difficult at the same time, as far as spouses in particular. What I would say is that what I've found is that we all, again, the self-deception piece is common to all of us. We all kind of suffer from this directionality confusion where we think that things are coming at us when really everything is coming from us.
Mm.
And I think it is sometimes possible to change another person, but only through your own perception of them, not through putting any demands or limits or ultimatums on them.
So I want to repeat what you just said. So the make sure I heard it correctly. It's not about the things are coming at us, but it's the things that are coming from us. Is that what you said?
Right.
Yeah. So how do we practically and simply put that into action, do you think?
Right. Well, it's hard because on one hand, we don't want to feel like we're responsible for all of the times we lose our peace, right? I mean, certainly it feels good to blame other people for at least some of them, right? Can't we be off the hook for some of them?
Yeah.
But I've found that the answer to that is not really, that you do play a part in it. Again, it's on an unconscious level because we never intentionally set out to be unloving or to have an experience of feeling unloved. That's never what we set out to do. But with the ego, we can't help but do it because it's just the way that script is written. That's the way that script plays out.
Yeah.
So you just have to get out of it entirely. And we talked about kind of being observers earlier. If you can kind of play that role and in your mind, even if you watch yourself kind of getting in this, somewhat childish back and forth, with your husband, to just have part of your mind focus on the fact that we're completely the same. We want the same things. We want to feel love. We are love. This is just kind of an illusionary game that we're playing out right now. And just kind of let it pass without saying, well, what does it mean? Is it going to happen again? Is this how my marriage is going to be now? Is it, is it going to get worse as the kids grow up? And what about when the kids leave? Then could we stand each other? Like that kind of thing just will drive you insane, obviously.
So driving back to your very, very first point, there is no separation between each other, humans. My husband and I are one and the same because we are from the source. And that, just to be clear, you don't have to be quote unquote religious to believe in this concept of, the source or universe or God or whatever word you want to use for it, right? In your mind. So, exactly. I mean, even an atheist or an agnostic person could still believe in sort of a higher connection. I don't know. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah. So what I think is sometimes a trap that I fall into, or I've certainly seen in the past, is that tit for tat playing, keeping score of like, oh, I did this, but you didn't do this. And then I did this and you didn't do this. And it's just a nightmare and it's exhausting as well.
Even to keep track of it all is exhausting. You don't need to take notes.
Right. So how can we break that cycle, do you think?
Well, what I try to do, and again, I bring A Course in Miracles is very metaphysical in that, this oneness is our only reality, and it's a formless, eternal type of oneness. So the ego is very identified with being in a body, in a world, in our relationships. That's kind of the symbols that the ego uses. But the way I think of it is, if oneness is real, which I do believe it is, that's my experience when I allow it to be, when I don't block it, I just kind of think of myself as playing all roles at once. So I'm maybe in an argument with my husband, but I'll literally try to imagine my own face over the top of his. And I just try to kind of, be gentle with myself, not like, why are you doing this again? You should know better. Like, he's not attacking you. You're attacking yourself. But I just try to, again, let it pass and be gentle with myself. And then I'll find that very soon it'll just kind of fall away because I'm not giving it that energy to keep it going. I'm invested in letting it fall away.
And you mentioned in your book that another lie that we tell ourselves is nothing is more important than being right. Maybe that's something to remember when we argue with our spouses sometimes I say, is it better to be married or be right? In this exact moment. Why is it? Why is it?
Would you rather be, the Course says, would you rather be right or happy? And that's just a good question.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes what we're defending with our rightness is just, again, something in the world, something outside of ourselves. And what we're really doing is defending against the love that we are. That's what the Course says. We're kind of making this elaborate shield against it, which sounds crazy that we'd want to protect ourselves from love, but that's how frightened we are. We literally feel like love is threatening and fear is comforting.
Wait, so why are we frightened of love? Like, is it just the sense of rejection, the potential of rejection, the potential of getting hurt? What do you think's deeper underneath that?
Right. Well, the Course would say that we're afraid of love because we feel like we've somehow destroyed perfect oneness. That really the oneness is the state that we've never left, but we kind of decided, well, what would it be like to be separate? Just as like, if I was going to imagine it, what would it be like?
Mm-hmm.
And then we started imagining it and we actually laughed at it. And then we forgot to laugh. And then we thought it was real. And then we thought that, oh my gosh, not only am I just playing this it's not a game anymore. I've really destroyed perfect oneness. God is going to come after me. And then, so in that sense, we can even fear God. We can fear our very source of love and feel cut off from it completely.
Is there something to this as well with sort of, maybe I'm grabbing here, but I have read articles in the past about, how much you hold a baby right when they're very fresh and new and why skin on skin contact is so important. Do you have any thoughts on that of like children that don't get that close connection physically at an early stage have such a fear and an insecurity, or I don't know if that's the right word, of like not feeling safe, right? When they grow up later down the line. Do you think there's something to this?
I do. And I think that could just be one of many scripts that we agree to play out, that fear is real and the source of fear is in the world. Like, oh, my mom didn't hold me, or, I was adopted from an orphanage, so of course I can't love anyone.
Right.
That might seem like the case and people would agree with you. They'd be a witness to that. But is it really or is there something else that we can all do now to just be done with this, really, and to just kind of reject the whole idea of fear? I think it is possible to do it at that deep of a level and have effects that are just constant.
So what I think I hear you saying is that, there are these stories that we tell ourselves because of this happened in our childhood. That's why I am this, or I'm not very good with numbers because of this, or, oh, I could never get married again, or I could never get married, period, because of this, and this, right? So it's a matter of kind of erasing some of those stories. So talk us through maybe a few more of the lies that we tell ourselves and practical ways that we can just shake it up a bit.
Right. Well, I think really another way that all the lies have something in common is this piece of judgment. Judgment comes naturally to the ego. That's really all the ego can do. And that's what literally keeps the ego going, just like you could equate it to breathing keeps the body going. So judging keeps the ego keeps it going. And we do this constantly at an unconscious level. And sometimes it seems like benign. And sometimes we know, okay, I've really judged that person wrongly. But judging is not natural. And when we let that part fall away, we understand kind of our true self, our higher self kind of automatically comes through. And I did just post a judgment releasing meditation on my website that's free with email sign up if you'd like to check that out. But really, when you catch yourself judging, to get to something practical that people can grab onto, you catch yourself judging, you're like, oops, I've judged this person again. Then, or like Britney Spears would be like, oops, I judged you again. I'm always thinking of jingles in my head. So, okay, because we should be gentle with ourselves. We're so quick to really put daggers through our heart. Like, how could I be so, unloving? Yeah. So, okay, you notice yourself, you judge someone again. All right, so what do? So the first thing you do is just notice it. And then you just ask for your higher self to allow you to push through it and see a loving response at the other side. And that will happen unless, again, that underground part of you doesn't want to be loving. And that's what we all have to face, is that that's what the ego is leading us towards, just this, unloving thoughts and unloving perceptions of ourselves and others that are just kind of the trap of it all.
Yeah. So what can we do beyond that? What's the next step after that to help break that cycle?
Well, I think forgiveness is really the key, and that's certainly a big part of many spiritual paths. I do like the way the Course describes forgiveness. It takes it to a much deeper level. It wants you to focus on forgiving your relationships that are right in front of you. You don't have to go out on a quest to find, what am I meant to forgive in this lifetime? It's always what's right in front of you, right in the moment, with your kids, with your husband. That's what it is for me, typically.
Your parents, your story
Yeah,
with your best friend or your
right.
ex-best friend or your work, your boss, any of those things, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Hmm.
And then, really, though, that's just the beginning. And once you practice forgiveness and are open to it in all situations, like there's nothing that you want to hang on to and not forgive, then you can really get to the deepest layer of really forgiving yourself for ever thinking you could be anything less than perfect, anything less than eternal, anything less than loving.
Mm.
That's the deepest part. That's the deepest evaluation that you will get there. Yeah, you'll eventually feel that way about yourself and others.
But don't you believe, though, that, I mean, when you start doing that deep soul work, you peel back the onion layers, you start to hit shame or guilt or, just some really deep rooted, not very nice stuff that we say to ourselves. Like how I think I can only speak for myself when I start doing this work and I hit those and I go, oh, I don't really want to go there. Or that's just so scary, sad,
Right.
horrible, deep work. Then we push it off. Like, how do we lean in those moments where it does get to that deep, scary, hard stuff? What would you recommend?
Right. And I think you nailed it when you identified it as guilt specifically.
Yeah.
Um, Everything the ego does is laden with guilt, and it's an unconscious guilt. And the Course defines it as thinking that we've pulled off the impossible and separated from our source, and the ramifications that would be involved with that.
Hmm.
But it just permeates everything. In fact, what I've tried to do is just notice how often those guilt thoughts come up, and that's the first part, is to be aware of it. And so I've done that practice of just kind of watching my mind to see how quickly it returns to guilt. And I found that really it's only just a couple of seconds. Like I almost feel like I need a guilty thought as much as I need like air to breathe.
Hmm.
And sometimes it could be like minor, like maybe, oh, why did I buy Crest toothpaste when I use Colgate? Like
Hmm.
that could be like a small piece of guilt. Or it could be like a guilty thought, like, how could a serial killer like go into a school and start shooting, like some,
Yeah.
projecting guilt on a grand scale.
Yeah.
But really, those two forms seem so strikingly different. But any form of guilt is going to come between you and peace that you're entitled to. Like peace is your inheritance, it's who you are. And we just put this stuff in front of it as a barrier,
Hmm.
which means we have the control to remove it, which is the good news.
Right.
But
So how do we do
it can
that?
be frightening.
How do we
Well,
remove these elements from our lives?
right. So the first is to be aware
Yeah.
and just to notice that, okay, I've listened to the ego again, but maybe the ego isn't the best teacher. I'm learning over time. So maybe I shouldn't trust the ego blindly and just go along with it. And as soon as you do that, that's really all that's necessary to part the seas, so to
Yeah.
say, because, the ego isn't natural to us. Ego isn't part of us at all, never was, never could be. So as soon as that willingness opens up, then who you really are just takes over. And it's more in the means of a feeling that you get, just that on a good day, I'll have a feeling that I just feel continuous. I just feel like my peace is just like, that I can't be hurt. I'll really have a feeling that I can't be hurt and that I can't be destroyed. Like, and it's just an amazing, quieting feeling.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily verbal in words, but and then it doesn't last, and I'm but
well, and
the goal is to.
I was just going to say, like, what I
Right.
think I struggle with the most is what I call goldfish brain. Like, I'm really good at, having these big transformations in my life and having these big aha moments. And I mean, like, oh, I'm really getting to the core of stuff. And then my goldfish brain pops in and, like, literally a day or even 8 minutes later, I forget. Like I have these like temporary amnesia
Right,
moments. So I have found personally, I have to write stuff down. Like I have copious journals upon journals upon
Right.
journals out there. But not just write it down, but also go back and look at what you've written down over and over and
Sure.
over again and go, aha, I was here on this
Mhm.
date in this year on there, and I made the decision to no longer believe those beliefs, and I've done this work already. And I think it's a matter
Right.
of reminding yourself, like, oh yeah, because we fall back into that loop, that negative thought process loop that we tell ourselves. You're fat, you're
Right.
ugly, you're not very smart, you're not good with
I
numbers,
know.
whatever those stories are that I've heard many people say to me as their stories, and
Right.
yeah. So beyond
And
journaling, what kind of tools do you use? Do you use meditation or prayer or talking to a friend, or how do you help process and remember this stuff?
all of those things. But what was coming to mind as you were just talking about the goldfish brain, which I love that analogy,
Mm,
is just, I guess self-talk is probably my number one thing I go to. I meet myself where I am and then just try to talk myself out of it back to where I was, before
mhm.
this all started.
Yeah.
But it can really be whatever the negative thought you're having, I think it could be turned around as quickly as I want to feel good and I am good.
Mm,
Like just that simple reminder
yeah.
can transform it, because we are sort of doing this to ourselves. And that's the hard part to swallow, because we're just so resistant to that. And there is comfort in being a victim, big or small. And sometimes we even compete for who's the biggest victim. And we can look at that with gentleness as really like a call for love, the Course says.
Yeah.
But we're not victims.
Mhm.
And again, if you think of us as playing all parts at once, anytime you were a victim, you were the one you were playing your own victimizer. As
Mm.
crazy as that sounds, you can think of it as like a sci-fi movie, but that's kind of what,
But
what if that,
wait a sec though. And I agree with you, but I'm going to challenge as well. And I hope you'll come
yeah,
back with a good retort. When
let's
I
hope.
feel like a victim in a situation is when I feel like
Right,
I don't have, quote unquote, any control over changing the situation.
right,
Isn't that what happens when you feel like a victim? It's when you feel like you think, whether it's true or not, that you have no control over changing your current situation. What do you do
right.
then?
Well, maybe for me, I have to admit to myself that my powerlessness is a choice. And why would I ever choose to be powerless? Well, if unconsciously I think I was the one who destroyed perfect oneness, I want someone else to blame. I want to be powerless, then I won't be accused.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that might be what's at the root of it, even though that certainly doesn't make sense to the ego. The ego will reject that. Like, that's crazy. That's not how the world works.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the world is the ego's domain. Everything of the ego won't last. It's impermanent. It's not who we really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much to this. So I ask a few questions that I ask everybody on the podcast, and
Okay.
I'd love to
Okay,
kind of
good.
ask you as well. First and foremost, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, because I feel like there's so much to talk about and so much to
Yeah.
dive into. And just a reminder to everybody, you click the link in the show notes and you'll be able to get more details about Dr. Dana and her book, The Top 10 Lies We Tell Ourselves and How to Stop Believing Them. And everything that we talk about today is in the show notes. But so, Dana, tell me, what books are you reading these days? Maybe a book or a blog that's inspiring you, or in fact, actually poking buttons and challenging you right now. What's one?
hmm One of my favorite authors and teachers out there right now is Gabby Bernstein, and
Mm,
she's a little dynamo that she does everything like you just mentioned. She's in the podcast and she writes a lot of books. But the one that resonated with me the most recently was The Universe Has Your Back.
yeah.
And again, I just love how she reinforces that we can't be alone. That is an imaginary state to feel alone. Like it's not even possible. And
Yeah.
that is, so comforting. You talked about the analogy of an infant. Like it's like giving yourself a security blanket, like a warm, fuzzy, like reminder
Mm.
of who you really are.
And I
And I
think,
also thought,
yeah, no, and
go ahead.
I think a lot of times what I notice is when I think of myself as like this little island and nobody else is helping me, and gosh, I have to
Yeah,
carry it all by myself, and that is
right.
where you feel so separated, and you feel life
Right.
feels really heavy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, that book, The Universe Has Your Back. I haven't read it yet, but you highly recommend it.
I do. And I also read anything by Gary Renard. He's a course teacher, and I learned from him how to teach and bring humor into it, which I think just resonates with me, because my barometer for whether or not I'm getting something or getting over something is if I can laugh about it. So he's one of my
Mm,
teachers on how to do that. And his most famous book is The Disappearance of the Universe.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll definitely check that one out as well. Is there any good apps or maybe tools or actionable tips that could help us simplify our life? Something that's working in your life right now?
I would say my number one action tip is just to resist giving away my power um, to anything external, to any relationship or role, anything that I might, again, slip into that choice for being powerless because of the payoff, the seeming payoff that I get from it.
So
I'm just not willing
to
give up my power.
When you say releasing your power, though, if you're talking about a relationship and we're all one, how does that correlate to that thought?
Right. So giving up your power is not really something we can actually do. That's just kind of this illusory game that we play with the ego where there seems to be shifts and imbalances. And like we said, there's victims and victimizers, and sometimes the lines are clearly drawn. But that's all things that the ego does, drawing lines and making comparisons and judging and ranking. And all of that is just exhausting. And all of that just leads to nowhere.
Yeah, it is so true. And, that also, I imagine it's a cyclical cycle, right? Because you get yourself in a frenzy in your brain and in your heart. You feel mentally exhausted. You might not be sleeping well. You might not be eating well, which is feeding into your physical body, deteriorating with your mental. And it's nonstop, right? Don't even go there about in the UK where I live, in the winter months when it's gray and miserable and cold and horrible, you add that on top of all of that, hot mess.
Right.
It's why we have a minister of loneliness appointed by the government here, because it's really sad. Yeah. So tell us then, Dana, what's one person in your circle of friends who we should interview on the Simplifiers podcast and why?
Oh, good. I would nominate Lena Rose. She just wrote a book that was released just a few days ago, actually. It's available now on Amazon, other places as well. It's called Enlighten Your Life.
Okay.
And she writes like a poet, and she is just so honest in her self-reflection that it's yielded huge rewards for herself, and she shows you how to do it with her affirmations and her prayers. So I would recommend her.
Yeah. And just a reminder to you, Dr. Dana, Corinne Zupko is the one that recommended you for us to interview, and it has been such a delight as well. So this is the pay it forward to kick more love out into the world and find more amazing women like yourself to interview on the podcast. So for me, simplicity and gratitude, they go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for right now in your life?
I would have to say many things, of course, but I'm most grateful for my emotional support cowbell. Yes, it's a real cowbell. I do carry this in my purse, and I just sometimes take it out in public and start playing it because you have to smile, and people around you will smile and be like, what is she doing? And it's just one of the ways I like to join with people.
You literally carry that giant cowbell in your purse.
I do. I have a very big purse because I have small kids, so I need a lot of equipment. Yeah.
I love it. And sometimes you do need a cowbell, let's just be real, to change up the scenery and snap you out of whatever, spiraling thoughts you might be having in those moments. So what do you think then is one of your superpowers that you possess in life, and how did you develop that skill or trait over time?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say persistence. That over time, I'm just less and less willing to settle for anything less than peace. Like, I want to feel good. I want this more than anything. Yeah. And I want to share it more than anything. Yeah.
Are you feeling better than you have been in the past? Do you feel like you're on a path of healing?
Yes. And the interesting thing, because historically, and I think for most of us, we can relate to the fact that we do just look to the externals for how we should be feeling. Well, what have I accomplished? What roles am I in? But lately, I'm starting to feel peace for no reason. And that's when I really feel like, wow, I think I'm making some progress because nothing outside of me seems to be triggering this, but I just feel good. How dare I? How dare I? But no, I do.
Yeah. And I think that at the end of the day, that's what we all want, right? And that's what we're trying to discover and understand. How do we get there? Because I think it
Right.
is a trap of, well, if I just buy this thing, it will be there. If I just lose 20 pounds, it'll be there. If my bank account just had this much money in there, it will be there. If he just would say those words to me, then I'll be there. Like, it's always expecting other things to be the magic pill that solves it. But I think what you're saying is it's all inside, right?
You just gave a perfect list. That was good. Yes, exactly. It is an internal journey. And that's one of the things that I got mixed up when I was depressed. I was thinking that my external self was what I presented to the world in the roles I played, and that my internal self was these private thoughts of self-hatred in my case. And now with my spiritual path, I'm learning that that wasn't my real internal self. I needed to keep going and to this place where that's something we all share all the time.
Yeah.
This, kind of eternal peace.
Yeah. So let's end up on a last couple of questions. 2 things I could do right now, today, that are simple things to start getting myself on the path of healing. If people are listening right now, what's 2 things they can do today?
I would just say watch and connect, just to make it as simple as possible. Just watch yourself, which really means watch your thoughts, because the thoughts really trigger everything. Thoughts trigger the feelings, trigger the actions, etc. It's not the other way around. Watch your thoughts, watch your interactions, watch your relationships. And anytime that you feel like fear has crept in, or anything less than what you want, anything less than love and acceptance, then just invite another way to come through, and it's always there as long as we don't block it. So it will be a happy ending.
Yeah.
And it's worth the effort.
Yeah. And my last question for you is this. So somebody is listening to this episode and really connecting with your story and realizing, gosh, there is something to this. And I do keep telling myself these lies that are no longer serving me. Dana, if you could just whisper into her ear right now, just for her ears only, something that could pull her out of the muck and think a new thought, and encourage her on a path to healing, what would you say to her right now?
You know what? What I'm imagining right now is that I would just look at that person right in the eyes, and it would almost just be like a nonverbal exchange of knowing. Like there's really almost, because people get so caught up in, well, what would be that perfect thing I could say? Well, what if you don't have to say anything? What if there's just kind of a perfect way of being that's just total acceptance? And I would just try to hold that in my mind and join with her where she's at, and together we'd remember it together.
It's so beautiful, Dana. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And just a reminder to everybody, click on the show notes for details on her upcoming book, which is being released August 15th, 2018 on Amazon, Top 10 Lies We Tell Ourselves and How to Stop Believing Them. Dana, where do you hang out the most on social media? Where can people get connected to you?
I would say Facebook's my number 1 right now, and Instagram's a close second.
Okay, great. So we'll put the links down below, but it's Dr. Dana Marrocco for her Facebook page, so you can connect with her. Yes, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Thank you. I appreciate being asked and sharing with you, and I just wish we could hang out now.
Yes. Maybe we need a follow-up conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks again, Dana.